With the recent dissolvement of the Northwest Office of Diversity and Inclusion, there's been a lot of discussion and concern among the Northwest community. Following the development, I got the opportunity to sit down for an exclusive interview with Northwest President Dr. Lance Tatum. The following contains my full interview with President Tatum with his unedited answers. So, just a couple questions about DEI.
Right.
Really appreciate your time and you speaking with us today.
No problem.
First one, some questions that we've kind of gathered from students as well, but originally you sent out an email to only faculty and staff.
Right.
Many students kind of wondered why they weren't notified until a week later. So what was kind of the reason or answer for the students wondering that?
Yeah, we talked about this at Student Senate the other night. There are times in which decisions are to be made, and the timeliness of those decisions are not always to our doing. When we sent it to faculty and staff, the thought was that we knew that students would get the information, even if we didn't send it directly to them. We also knew that faculty and staff would at least have some understanding of the national conversation that was going on. And they could help students at least process the initial bit of news. And we hoped that they could also convince students that more information would be coming that would have more detail as to what the next steps look like. You know, at the end of the day, I think that happened in pockets. I think that there were areas that perhaps it didn't happen as well as I had hoped. I knew that those students who were most directly impacted by the news would have access to Dr. Malone, Ms. Davis, and others in that office that could kind of walk through there. And my understanding is they did have a series of our conversations on Tuesday to try to help them better understand what was going to happen.
Perfect. And then your email to students sent out a few days ago stated that you wanted to expand the current DEI model to support all students. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we have to be extremely mindful of is our retention rate. So retention is measured by who comes here as a freshman and then returns as a sophomore. But the real issue with retention is who stays all 4 years to complete their degree. It is a very expensive process to recruit students to the university. Where we have our greatest success is when a student comes to Northwest, stays at Northwest, and graduates from Northwest and gets a job. We know that there are certain populations on campus that have a more difficult time remaining in school. And it's not just because they may be a bit out of place, because they're coming from an environment where perhaps they had access to services or to support structures that don't exist in Maryville. But we also know that there are financial burdens that students have to be confronted with. We know that there's loneliness. We know that people get homesick. We know that there are populations, for instance, like our first generation students, who are coming to Northwest without the benefit of having a parent or sibling attend a university. And so just understanding how you navigate an institution creates stress, which impacts that retention rate. We're expanding our undergraduate international population. We're being very focused with that. We know that bringing students from the other side of the world to Maryville is going to be a cultural shock. So the idea here is not only are we going to serve those populations, but we want to be able to take those activities and those services and fold them into a larger population of the university. I think that we all benefit by being exposed to different people. Right? And so that exposure shouldn't just come in a very narrowed experience, it should come in a broad experience. I'm also excited with the opportunity of looking at ways in which we can integrate more expanded services or educational opportunities, and not all just in the classroom, but how do students understand financial literacy? Are there ways in which we can fold that into programming that really helps students to become more equipped to deal with those types of questions as they move through college and then exit out of college? I think that the idea of cultural exposure is always going to be a part of our programming. We may spend a little bit more time working with student groups who are very focused in those areas to be able to help them organize, promote, and in some cases, maybe even fund, but it would be students who drive that conversation and not necessarily the institution. And so I think that's the idea of broadening services. We have a lot of opportunity in how our Student Success Center can actually get into populations that perhaps we're not actually accessing right now, to give them the needed resources to, again, retain. It is about the retention picture.
Perfect. And then in your email to students, you mentioned that transition is inevitable.
Right.
Referring to the legislative orders that have been passed. What impact did the legislative orders passed nationally and here in Missouri have on the DEI decision? Yeah,
I think that we're not running from or we hiding the fact that there's a national conversation going on about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The world evolves, it continues to evolve. And where 6 to 8 years ago we went through a fairly significant evolution of how DEI got put into universities, into organizations, now the conversation is it so embedded that perhaps it's not serving the broad population? There are right now 5 legislative bills that have been filed in Jeff City that specifically talk about diversity, equity, inclusion activities in state agencies. We know that 2 years ago there were 13 bills filed. So it's not going to stop. My goal has been to put Northwest in a position so that we have the autonomy to make decisions about how we're going to serve students and in which ways we're going to support students going forward. And I would prefer that to be a local conversation and not something that is in Jeff City or at the national level.
Perfect. And you've mentioned that you've looked at academic restructuring alongside new academic student support models. Would you be able to elaborate on that right now?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into too much detail because Dr. Hoyman is going to really roll out the specifics of that. Ever since I arrived at Northwest, I have been interested in how we have organized ourselves academically. At the departmental level, it's pretty clear to me that we look similar to our peers and to what the national model looks like. Once you get above that level, things become a little bit more confusing. And I think as you recruit students to a university and they visit other universities and they talk to academic deans or they talk to other academic leadership, when they come to Northwest, those positions don't exist. And so those conversations are occurring in different ways. And I want to be able to provide students with access to academic leaders that are directly tied to their academic interests. So if you're an ag major, even though we have a school director, I think it's a much more powerful conversation to have when you talk to a dean of agriculture. And so that's been kind of the driving first conversation, but I think it's also how we organize ourselves within. How budgets are built, how initiatives are carried out, and then how identity exists within departments. Right now we have departments that are lost in the conversation because they're so far down in the structure. Having something that is a little bit more college oriented, I think will give academic departments a chance to rise up and to have a broad exposure.
Perfect. And we've gotten questions about what will happen to current staff members of the ODI. So what can you say about them, their jobs?
So, I think that that's been a common question that we've gotten. Before we announced the first release, we actually brought the 3 individuals who work in that area into this office and told them, first thing, your position with the university is secured. So what I would envision, and I don't want to put Dr. Malone in a corner, but what I envision is that as we broaden and expand those services, that those individuals will not necessarily be focused in an ODI specific function, but they'll be kind of folded into the broader scope of activities that we do to support students overall.
Perfect. And then how do you plan to support students that feel maybe that their space or representation on this campus has been taken away in some aspect?
Well, I think that as we look at our student groups and our clubs and organizations, I think there's lots of opportunity to develop place and identity. We have students that support our Black Student Union, our LGBTQ plus students. So those clubs are going to stay intact. Those are not going to go away. If it's about the space, right? What I have been concerned about is that we should be doing an excellent job at making students feel safe in all locations on campus, not just one specific space. I feel very confident that Dr. Malone is going to create a programming option for us in a space for us that gives students of all backgrounds a chance to be represented. So I'm not worried about that right now.
Perfect.
All right.
And then last question, if it's kind of relates to the last question, but if you'd like to elaborate more on it, what would you say to those students that rely on DEI programs and are concerned about what's next?
Yeah, I even put this at the end of the second release. I know that there is frustration. I know there is anxiety. From the day that I've arrived on campus, I've been as clear as I can possibly be. My first priority is to support students, and we're not going to stop supporting students. We're still going to have individuals that, those who feel a bit fearful of what's going to happen. There will still be individuals who are on staff who they can go to and that they can confide in, and that they can seek solutions to problems that they think that may be confronting them. So, I'd ask students to be patient. I just got a list. We're going to create a working group to kind of help identify gaps and opportunities that exist with this new opportunity in front of us. And so, we're going to have a broad representation of students on that group. Faculty are going to serve on that group. Staff is going to serve on that group. I'm really optimistic that they're going to come forward with a plan that I think that's going to benefit all students and that students can get excited about, whether you're in the broader population or you find yourself in a more narrowed population.
For more Northwest news coverage of this event or for other KNWT content, be sure to check out our channel or the links in the description below.